Welcome to the Black Rock Symposium. First, the logistics and housekeeping. I hope that everyone has already done it, but if you haven't, surreptitiously turn off your device, whatever device it might be that might ring or buzz. We all appreciate that, and it's a nice sign of respect for not only the speakers, but for the folks that are sitting around you. Thank you. If you need to use the bathroom facilities, go toward the back of the room, and someone will guide you because it's a bit of a labyrinth to get to them. But out to the back of the room and out through the exercise machines. I see many familiar faces in the crowd tonight, and I know you are here because you care about our park and the issues that affect it. Presenting such issues is the goal of this year's Black Rock Symposium. These events are a series of panel-based discussions on relevant regional topics that affect Joshua Tree National Park and the gateway communities that it serves. This series is presented as a cooperative program sponsored by the Joshua Tree National Park Association and Copper Mountain College. And I wanted to put a little extra thing in here about the college tonight. Many of you know that I came to this area for a position at the college some years ago, and I think it is just great. This is this year-long collaboration using their facilities and exposing people to the campus and the campus to the community. So I think that this little college that could does a great job. Paul Delaney I see in the crowd, and he's certainly been a part of all this. Thanks to President Jeff Cummings, who I don't believe is here, and all the other staff at CMC that have been a part of this. We, the Joshua Tree National Park Association, are the park's nonprofit partner. Our mission is to assist with natural and cultural resource preservation and educational activities of Joshua Tree National Park. Most of you are very aware of the Desert Institute, which is probably the best known and kind of the oversight group of the educational activities for the public. And Kevin Wong, who's standing in the back, most of you know him. He does a wonderful job to keep things going. In addition to these schedules, and the spring schedule is available over at their table over here, the spring and fall extensive weekend presentations, lectures, and activities. There are 4 lecture series, and we have 2 of them up here, the Old Schoolhouse and the Black Rock Symposium, and there are 2 more down in the lower desert, in Palm Desert and Palm Springs. So the Joshua Tree National Park does a great job in spreading good information out across our whole region. The Joshua Tree National Park Association board members who are here tonight include Mark Wheeler. Do you want to stand or raise your hand or something? Thank you. And Paul Smith is back on that side as well. There were some other board members who intended to be here but couldn't. And I am lucky enough to be a new board member in the Park Association, which I consider quite an honor. Also, can't let go of mentioning Meg Foley, the executive director, who does wonderful work in keeping the association going. And one more person to mention is Norma Mackey, our volunteer par excellence, who does everything. Hopefully you have had a chance to visit the informational tables. In addition to the Park Association, we have the Mojave Desert Land Trust and the Morongo Basin Conservation Association. Our format tonight is to hear from each of our 3 speakers, and then we will take your questions. If you have not already picked up one of the question papers, we will hand them out again at the end of the speakers, but we will bring the questions up here and forward them to either all or the appropriate members of the speakers group. We've asked each speaker to do about a 10-minute presentation prior to taking the questions and having then the discussion and the question and answer after all 3 have made their presentations. So tonight's program, as you know, is San Bernardino County Renewable Energy Code updates. And all of us in the room have a lot in common on this topic. We want to know what is in our future and what may affect us in the efforts to increase renewable energy. And with our national park being our tourism engine, our economic engine, that is of concern as we go forward with new projects to develop renewable energy. And for many of us, our awareness of these issues began with the DRECP, the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan. But today, our focus is on San Bernardino County, yet there is an inevitable crossover and involvement or interweaving of the two efforts, and you'll hear about both today. But the focus is on San Bernardino County's activities and plans for managing renewable energy. We are, Supervisor Ramos was delayed, so he will arrive. Our order of speakers in any case was to start with Fraser Haney, and then David Lamfrom, and then the supervisor. So we're still on track. We will complete this at 8:30. We stay within our guidelines. Granted, we're getting a little late start, but hopefully that will work out smoothly. Our first speaker then is Fraser Haney, but before we introduce him with his background and all that, could you come on up here for a minute?
I think I know what this is.
Well, you might. On behalf of the Park Association, you have given a lot of time and effort, and Fraser has been the moderator, but today he couldn't play a double role, be a moderator and a presenter, so I'm the honored person who got to be the moderator. But Fraser has given a lot to the efforts of this program, and we do want to thank you. And make this something for us.
Thank you very much.
We've got so many special people in this basin, and a lot of them are in this room, who do a lot of work on a lot of things. Okay, now his background, he joined the Mojave Desert Land Trust as its conservation director in 2013. Prior to that, he was the manager of the Wildlands Conservancy's Whitewater Preserve for 7 years. And he started his career as a ranger at the Pioneer Town Mountains Preserve, most of you know it as Pipes Canyon Preserve, where I first had the pleasure of meeting him. Fraser describes himself as almost a Joshua Tree native, and I'm not sure what that is, but in any case, he received his Bachelor of Science in Ecology from the University of California, Santa Cruz, and as a community member, he sits on the boards of Save Our Desert and the Wildlands Conservancy. And on top of all those duties and all that volunteering, he recently became a dad of a little girl named Lily.
Thank you, Lorraine. I'm gonna shut off a couple lights so we can see the. We'll just keep going until I get the right one. There it is. Thank you very much, Lorraine. That was a wonderful introduction, and I have some notes for next time. Anybody want to raise a hand if they know where this location in the picture is? Do 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 do. Not you, David, and Shauna knows, so not her. This is Silurian Valley. It's on the 127, just north of the town of Baker. It is in San Bernardino County. It's mostly public land. It's a very pristine place. A section of the old Spanish Trail runs through Silurian Valley. And up until just recently, there was a several thousand acre utility scale solar proposal just adjacent to Highway 127 in the Silurian Valley. It's also a very important region for wildlife. And I think the struggle in Silurian Valley highlights a lot of the issues that we face as we try to integrate renewable energy into our deserts. So I just wanted to put that up there to kind of begin and to frame out some of the problems that we've had and some of the promise that's still left out there, because for right now, the Bureau of Land Management has chosen to do the right thing in Silurian Valley and stop processing the application and leave Silurian Valley pristine and unchanged for right now. So we'll hope it stays that way. You want to go to the next slide? So I just figured I'd give an overview and some numbers and stats. A lot of this you already know, but I'm going to try and paint a picture of where we're at and why we're at such a key moment with the San Bernardino County renewable element update of the general plan. So we all know the importance of our open spaces in San Bernardino County for wildlife populations, for our quality of life, for supporting our outdoor-based tourist economies, and also for the training facilities that the military uses in our desert. And we're also probably all very aware of many of the conflicts that utility-scale renewable energy generation can present to those resources, like the overuse of groundwater in basins that are already in overdraft, or the very intensive use of hundreds of thousands of acres of land desert-wide, well-documented threats to wildlife like desert tortoise or migratory birds. And so we know where we're at right now is that we're trying to steer a lot of the utility scale generation in the Southwest. We want to see it steered towards disturbed lands and brownfields. So San Bernardino County has a great opportunity to lead right now in this discussion because of the place that we're at with the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan and the timing as that plan is developed, and the need for the county to participate in the plan. Also, we know about things like community choice aggregates that I'll talk a little bit more about, and the economic benefits that those can bring to the county and the way that they can keep local power generation inside of San Bernardino County. And we also know a lot about how we need to protect groundwater and our soils and our air quality and the threats that utility scale renewable generation can present to those things. And we also know that we have a lot of open space resources on both private and public lands in the county that the county can take a lead in helping us to protect in this process. You want to hit the next slide, Kevin? So, sorry for the numbers, folks, but I hope you, in the back, that you can see these. So, a change in climate is driving the effort to develop renewable energy in California. That we have to keep that in mind, right? That's the real boogeyman in the room. It's not the state or the feds, it's this question of what's going to happen to our climate. And that's what's pushing this whole debate along. But the vast majority of the state of California's renewable energy development is projected to occur in the California desert. So this is inside of the latest draft of the DRECP. This is their 2011 acreage calculator. And you can see in the first column, large-scale PV. It says in DRECP, in the DRECP area, 5,400 megawatts are proposed to be built in the next 10 years, between 2014 and 2024. And then it lists elsewhere in California about 1,200 megawatts total, and we're going to bring in about 800 megawatts from out of state. That means that for the state of California, in all of the planning processes for the state, our desert, our California desert, is projected to support 82% of the photovoltaic utility scale growth in the next decade. Going down the list, we see that large-scale solar thermal, like the plants at Ivanpah or Harbor Dry Lake, California desert is going to support 100% of that growth in the next decade, or is projected to in the plan. 100% of the growth in wind power in the state is projected to be in the California desert, and so on and so on. The bottom row says small scale or small solar PV, and that doesn't mean rooftop. That means small scale PV projects like Cascade Solar here in the basin. So the important thing about this is that San Bernardino County covers over 50% of the DRECP planning area. And most of the planned development at this point is on private land, which means that San Bernardino County is going to be the lead authority for environmental review and permitting of many of these projects that are projected in the state's calculations. Can I hit the next one, Kevin? So here's a map that many of you may know. How many of you have seen this map? Everybody know the pink blob map? Maybe half of you. So this is the map that shows what the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan is proposing for development envelopes and for conservation areas. Everything that you see on this map that's got that strange purple or pink color is a development focus area. And you can see on the left-hand side of the map is the Pacific Ocean and the California coast. And on the right-hand side of the map, we get over into Arizona. So that gives you an idea about, we're looking at most of Southern California here, and there's some pretty huge areas that could be development envelopes. And the way that DRECP has calculated these areas is to figure out how many megawatts of power generation they would like to plan for, and then figure out how many acres that need to be used to get that many megawatts. Hello, Supervisor Ramos, come on in. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
So in the entire California desert, there's over 2 million acres that are slated for development of development envelopes. It would be possible to build inside. And they're projecting about 10% of this is going to actually be built in, or about 220,000 acres. And they're basing that on how many megawatts the state's projecting we'll need by 2040. You want to hit the next slide, Kevin? So we're going to start to turn away from DRECP and talk a little bit more locally. One last slide here. You can see in what DRECP is saying they want our power mix, our renewable power mix in the state to look like by 2040. Again, the top couple lines are solar thermal power plants, like the Ivanpah plant or the Abengoa plant at Harper Dry Lake. The second line is solar PV, like Desert Sunlight or the Cascade Project. The third line is wind. And you go all the way to the right of the table, and you'll see that they've got acres. So these are acres that they're proposing need to be developed to produce that much power inside the DRECP. If you go all the way to the bottom of the list, this is where a lot of us are hoping for the future to make change, is small rooftop solar. And California is projecting that by 2040, they'd like to have 7,000 additional megawatts of small rooftop solar. That's the stuff that would go on any of our rooftops that you could get through the HERO program or the California Solar Initiative. So they'd like to have 7,000 megawatts online by 2040. And you notice over to the far right, that doesn't take any acres of land in the DRECP. So I'm framing out our option here. If the rooftop use doesn't use land in the DRECP, the utility scale uses do. We can't get away from having to probably develop some utility scale. I don't think there's a way to completely exit out. But if we can grow that 7,000 megawatts beyond their projections here, we're going to be using less acres. So there's a real saving of all of the issues that we're aware of. You want to hit the next slide, Kevin? Okay, here's another picture. Does anybody know where this is?
Silurian Valley.
This is Walmart in Yucca Valley. This is not Silurian Valley, David, not yet at least. Ooh. So the headline is, if we get more rooftop solar, that means that we have to disturb less open space acres. So how do we create more distributed generation? And how do we keep the benefits of that distributed generation local? This is Walmart in Yucca Valley. The system that's on Walmart's roof is 250 kilowatts, so it's a quarter of a megawatt. It's a pretty small system in the grand scheme of things, but what do you notice about the picture? There's a lot of disturbed ground around Walmart. There's a lot of parking area space, and there's no solar panels on top of Home Depot. And Petco and Marshalls are just out of the picture, but I promise you there's no solar panels on top of them either. So the point being is, this is good. This is going in the right direction. There's a lot more space to do rooftop solar in our basin. You want to hit the next slide? So our friends at the California Desert Coalition, thank you, California Desert Coalition, hired an engineer named Bill Powers who did a study on the photovoltaic capacity in the Morongo Basin. And so the first thing that Bill did is identify what our transmission looks like in the Morongo Basin. And he found that there's two power lines that run into the basin from Desert Hot Springs that deliver all of our power, and that we're a cul-de-sac, meaning There is no line that runs out to Lucerne Valley or out to Parker. We're not on a loop back down to the Coachella Valley. The power comes, you can imagine it like just little electrons flying up the line from Desert Hot Springs, and they land in the Morongo Basin. But they can't go anywhere else outside of the basin. Each year, annually, we use about 49 megawatts of capacity. And that is a peak load of about 110 megawatts. So, you know, an average day might be 49 megawatts, but in the summertime when we're all cooking and we have our air conditioners running, we've got 110 megawatts at the very most that we use in the entire Morongo Basin. What do we produce? We produce, these are estimates, but I feel pretty good about the estimates. We produce about 10 megawatts on our rooftops in the Morongo Basin of power. We produce about 62 megawatts from the installed small-scale utility plants like Cascade or the plants along Lear Avenue. What is our potential capacity? How much more could we add to rooftops? The rooftops in the basin, this is a calculation that Mr. Powers pulled from the California Energy Commission. The rooftops in the basin could support about 126 megawatts of solar installations. And he arrives at that number not like he's going to coat every single inch of every single roof, but using some kind of common sense methods to figure out what's realistic. And then in parking areas, we've got about 90 megawatts that we could develop on the parking areas in the Morongo Basin. And we have lots of transmission capacity. We've got about 190 megawatts of transmission capacity. So that means we can produce all the power on the rooftops that we want, we can move it around the basin, or we can move it back down the hill to be plugged into the rest of Southern California. So literally, if we solarize our rooftops in the right way, we can send power out of the basin and sell it to the rest of Southern California. I'm going to hit the next slide. One of the efforts that's going on right now that you all should know about that's a great effort is the Morongo Unified School District has carefully researched the financial benefits of rooftop solar on district facilities. They have a plan to install solar in the next few years on 15 facilities here in our basin, and they're projecting that this is going to save the school district about $9 million in the next 20 years. That's pretty good. Can I hit the next slide, Kevin? So how do we get from where we're at right now to the next place, which is being a little bit smarter about how we buy our power and pay ourselves to produce power? California passed a law in 2002 that allowed for the creation of community choice aggregates. And how many people know what a community choice aggregate is? All right. Well, the rest of you don't fall asleep quite yet. This law allows cities and counties to aggregate the buying power of individual customers within a defined jurisdiction to secure alternative energy supply contracts on a community-wide basis, but allowing consumers not wishing to participate to opt out. This means that we would create more control over our local power supply, that local residents could buy locally generated power at lower rates. It creates a vehicle for us to provide feed-in tariffs to buy power from customers who are overproducing on their rooftops. And it still partners with a utility like Southern California Edison to deliver power or wheel power from outside the area or wheel power to outside the area. Examples of functioning community choice aggregates right now. One is well established. It's the Marin Energy Authority. And in 2014, inside of that county authority, 60% of the energy that was delivered was from renewable energy resources. That's double what state goals want for 2020. That's pretty good. They're way ahead of the curve. And they're a little foggier than we are, too. Sonoma Clean Power is just beginning. They've got all their paperwork filed, and they're beginning to incorporate right now. And at their beginning service, they're going to be delivering 33% renewable energy in their mix. And if you wanted to spend more money and go up to 100% renewable, you could do that. Lancaster Energy Choice, this is an example of a city that has opted to become a community choice aggregate, has a goal of net zero by 2020. So this is something that we as a county could achieve, we could do, or the cities in the Morongo Basin, Yucca Valley and 29 Palms could do. Or it's possible that some of the water districts and schools and businesses could form a joint power authority and become their own community choice aggregate. Want to hit the next slide? Another lesson learned here in the Morongo Basin from utility scale solar. Again, I'm borrowing this from the California Desert Coalition's slideshow that they put together last year, is about water impacts. And this is another area that we really need county help on. For the 3 big solar projects in the basin that we all know about, Cascade and the 2 out in the Lear area, there's 270 acres of development and 35 million gallons of water, or 108 acre feet. That 108 acre feet, translating that, means the water usage of 430 desert households for a year. Or the Morongo Basin Pipeline's allocation of 983 feet, that's 11% of the entire allocation for the pipeline. So in areas like here in Joshua Tree, where we're not living in an overdrafted basin, but we are drawing down our groundwater, we used a huge amount of our water that we're purchasing from the state to build a solar plant or 2. So do you want to hit the next slide? So what we're doing right now is we're building on what we have as an existing solar ordinance that many of us helped to create, and we're building on that ordinance through the SPARK process. And I'm going to let the supervisor talk more about what SPARK means and what the promises there are. But a few things that have become consensus items from efforts like the Basin Energy Assessment Team and through other stakeholder meetings are, we really want the county to engage residents, municipalities, and businesses throughout the whole SPARK process and stay in touch between the public meetings as best as they can. And we have appreciated and want more of listening to community input efforts like the Basin Energy Assessment Team report, or in Lucerne Valley, the Economic Development Agency there named their own photovoltaic utility scale solar zone. And the supervisors really led that effort. So we want to see renewable energy development steered towards rooftops, parking lots, or for the utility scale renewable energy that we must develop if we have to go there, we want to see it pushed to disturbed lands. We want some protections for some basic resources that we all rely on strengthened. The first one is groundwater use. This is one of the most important things that we can use the county's help with through the SPARK process to strengthen. Second, we want to adopt clear standards. This is one that's close to my heart and the Land Trust's mission. We want to adopt clear standards for wildlife corridors, and we want to make sure that there's wildlife corridors that are mapped and codified in this general plan update, and that we're not just avoiding or minimizing those wildlife corridors, but completely excluding them from renewable energy development. We want to further protect our parks and protected areas. These things help us with our tourist economy. Our tourist economy relies on these big open spaces in our protected areas. And we want to protect our rural residential areas and our rural way of life in the basin. One of the best vehicles that I can see out there to do many of these things is to create a county-wide community choice aggregate that would deliver benefits of locally produced energy to residents and businesses. Either way, any way you slice it, in the next 10 years, we're going to be producing a tremendous amount of solar power in this county, and we should be reaping the benefits of that production instead of letting the profits exit the community. And I want to thank again the California Desert Coalition for their help in providing a lot of this information, and the Morongo Unified School District Solar Committee for their hard work for the school district. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a very logical and clear presentation. I appreciate that. And David Lamfrom is our next speaker, and David is the Associate Director of the California Desert Program of the National Parks Conservation Association. He actually, before that, was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, as a Regional Vice President for an environmental consulting firm. He's a graduate of New College of Florida, and this I thought was interesting, showing his Renaissance man side. His bioinformation says that he's done some significant studies in the fields of ecology, herpetology, foreign languages, Native American studies, and art. That's quite a breadth of areas of interest.
Perfect for Joshua Tree.
Yeah, actually, perfect. David has been published both as an author and a wildlife photographer in several issues of Wild South magazine. And more recently, many of you are probably aware, he is a co-author of Tortoises Through the Lens, a visual representation of a Mojave Desert icon. And by the way, that great book is available in the National Park Visitor Center stores, and the profits go to tortoise conservation. So with that, it's David's turn.
Thank you. So before I get started, I just want to say that it's been both a difficult and auspicious winter for Joshua Tree National Park, in that, we've seen desert sunlight come online, and we've also seen the saga, which was the Eagle Mountain landfill, finally closed once and for all. It's important to think about, I think, these long campaigns. Fraser alluded to Silurian Valley. Sometimes when there are so many issues, so many urgent issues, so many campaigns, it's easy to get lost in, I don't even know what the right word is, fear, anger, confusion. Why are they doing this to us? It's also really important to understand that some of these things just take some time to bake, and that if you are truly willing to persevere, we can make really great things happen. And that's kind of what I was thinking about when Fraser was talking about. I was kind of meditating on how in 2008, there really were not very many renewable energy projects in the desert. And, we're thinking about energy being produced, we're thinking about where that energy is going. We also understand how rapidly that technology is shifting and changing. And I think that many of us are wondering if this particular solution, being DRECP, is going to be an appropriate response or answer by time we get to the point when it would be fully implemented and beyond. And I think life is very much about timing. And so that question, I think, weighs heavy on me and in my heart. And I tell folks all the time that I'm probably one of the luckiest people in the whole world. I get to work to protect one of the wildest places left on the planet. And I get to spend time deep in those places. As I travel around the California desert, not just in beautiful Joshua Tree, but Mojave National Preserve and Death Valley and the Eastern Sierra and the southern border, you just realize that there are lifetimes and lifetimes worth of canyons that you will only get to see and never walk up. And that's if you're walking every single day. And there are places that very few, if any, people have ever gone. The wildness of this desert takes my breath away. And I'm so thankful to live here and to work to protect it. But I realize that I came here during a time of transition, and that the desert itself is in a time of transition as well. And the best way that I can characterize it is that I feel like our willful and beautiful loneliness is coming to an end. And we're getting kind of to a crossroads where we are going to have to make significant decisions about what our future is going to be, and that those decisions are not something that we will be able to pass on to the next generation. It's these are not decisions that we can punt on. We are going to be the ones who are going to be manning the ship or behind the wheel or whatever you want to call it for the decisions about exactly how much of this desert will be used for what purposes. We have a profound head start. If you look at a map of the California desert, what you realize, and I've done all types of number crunching and analytics, and literally, the California desert is the wildest place in the lower 48. And there are very few places left on this planet where you could draw a line of wildness that stretches 500 miles in one direction or the other. I imagine how long you could just walk from I-15 north before you ever hit a road. It's a really long way. I share these thoughts as I think about some of what's happened, how in 2008 there were 1.3 million acres of applications strewn across the California desert. I also want to think about that in the positive aspect, which is that we have in some ways grabbed some control, or wrestled, maybe a better, more appropriate way to characterize that we've wrestled some control, that we have stood up and said, these things are not appropriate, we want to see this happen like this, and we went through different iterations, different versions, if you will. We went from there being no guidance to the solar PEIS. And, I want to express to folks that while that solar PEIS was happening, we were taking the staff of the Secretary of the Interior out into the field, that we were fighting like hell for them not to put variance lands in the Morongo Basin. And while we didn't get much of what we wanted, many things that mattered were done. And there is a trajectory of progress, that we are working towards something. And that, I think, possibly most importantly, decision makers understand that they can't just come into the California desert and do whatever it is they decide to do from Washington. And I don't mean that in an anti-governmental way. I mean that in the way where you can only understand a place if you've spent time in it. You can only value a place if you've walked slowly and seen a horned lizard. Everybody in this room knows that the desert is magic, and that when you walk slow, things that you didn't realize were there start coming to life all around you. I have the unfortunate task of driving by the Ivanpah Solar Project much more than I would like, and to say that Desert Sunlight broke my heart would be a terrible understatement. Those two projects kind of hang over me in a really hard way, like a perennial rainstorm. And I try to think about what we can do to do better. And then I also realize that in the California desert, things like in 2013 when the greatest Joshua tree bloom that anybody has ever seen happened, and that nobody knew that could happen, reminds me that the value of protecting this place is not just based in protecting what we know and what we love, but that literally understanding that the California desert represents the unknown, that there's so much left to learn and discover if we're willing to stand up now and protect it, if we're willing to be who we need to be right now for this place. I've said it once, but I'll say it again because I think it's important. Renewable energy is a generational issue. We are standing on the cliff, and we will have an opportunity. One date, we know Monday, right? This Monday is the end of the comment period for the DRECP, where they're going to be making decisions about 22 million acres in this California desert. 22 million acres is basically the size of Virginia. They're going to be making a plan for a state the size of Virginia, but that by and large is beautifully wild. Within this process, I think we have a couple of opportunities because we understand that there are a number of really positive implications of DRECP, but that also we would be, if accepted, institutionalizing some things that really hurt as well. And when I think about how we grab political power, how we assert pressure, how we stand up, how we organize, how we do the things that we need to do to make sure that the California desert's voice is heard, that's a lot. And it's a really ambiguous face. It's an administration, it's an energy commission, it's a Bureau of Land Management. At least we have the county here tonight to talk to us. There's a spectacular opportunity for us to demonstrate the leadership that we'll need to see, that we would expect from others. I guess the way that I characterize it is that you think about places like Hetch Hetchy, you think about Glen Canyon, you think about all these campaigns, and you just say to yourself, if I could have been there, I would have done something. Well, you're here. You're here now. And the California desert is the underdog of underdogs, of underdogs, of underdogs. California desert is the underdog. People don't understand this place. They don't understand how rich it is, how wild it is. When in DC, a place where I spend far too much time, people, I've never seen a place that somebody could brush off with one thought or glare. You can just say California desert and they go, huh. And it's over in their minds. Here's something that Fraser and I and other folks have been thinking about, and I don't think has been expressed in a very public way, but that I'd like to express tonight. The agencies are working backwards from a goal. The goal is 20,000 megawatts. What they want to do is to develop 20,000 megawatts. The state goal and the DRECP's goal are actually pretty similar. They're 20,000 megawatts, which is really unfortunate for us. But when some really smart people like Joan Taylor started doing the math on where we were, and regardless of how we feel about any of these projects like Ivanpah, Desert Sunlight, I think you all know my position on those projects. When you add up everything that counts within the time that we are allowed to count, and it doesn't count rooftop solar, the number for where we are is 10,000 megawatts. We're at 10,000 megawatts, right? Mission accomplished, right? You put up the banner, we're halfway there. But then when you start looking at the rest of that math and you look at things like repowering wind, so just using more efficient wind or just, replacing towers in places where there are already wind fields. When you look at infill, just putting projects in places where there are already projects. And when you look at the basic assumptions for geothermal energy, that number goes up to like 19,000 megawatts. And so folks like me who aren't that smart get really confused about why we're talking about 2 million acres of DFAs and what that means. And folks who aren't that smart like me also wonder why all the verbiage is so tricky and why there are 2 million acres of DFAs, but then there's hundreds of thousands of additional acres that are study areas, and that there are over 1 million acres of lands that have no designation whatsoever. If we're going to be doing a renewable energy plan, let's do it. But we can't hide the prize. Those places that are undesignated, some of those places are places that really matter, like the Eagle Mountain region, like Soda Mountains, some of the highest conflict areas within the entire planning period, within the plan, are just being labeled as undesignated and aren't being accounted for, nor is analysis being done on them. I want to leave you guys just simply thinking about what's at stake here. The last couple of weeks, I've had the pleasure of driving up and down the California desert, and I really think that we're going to have a spectacular bloom year. And when I think about those blooms, I think about them as a meditation on hope. If you catch some of those brown areas during July, especially during midday, you could really easily overlook them, but then to realize that just kind of lurking beneath the surface, waiting for the ideal amount of precipitation and the perfect amount of sunshine, comes the greatest fields of flowers you could ever imagine. That's what I think about when I think about the California desert. The California desert is the rose that nobody can see. And I'm here tonight to ask you guys to help me stand up for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. I always like hearing the poetic parts, especially of your speeches. Very nice. Our final speaker, before we eventually get to the questions, is our supervisor, James Ramos. And I did want to mention, since we're on a college campus, I thought it appropriate to mention that Supervisor Ramos has degrees from Victor Valley College, Cal State San Bernardino, and University of Redlands. So he's certainly a part of the educational community, and in a number of other ways. He became our San Bernardino County 3rd District Supervisor in 2012. From 2005 till 2012, the supervisor was a member of the San Bernardino Community College Board of Trustees, where he served as president, and he was the first Native American to be elected to that board. Going back a little further, in 2007, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger appointed Ramos to the California State Native American Heritage Commission, and he has served as chairman of that group since that time. Governor Jerry Brown appointed Ramos in 2011 to the State Board of Education, and he was the first Native American appointed to that group in the history of California. Supervisor Ramos is also the immediate past chairman of the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. And my final point before bringing him up here is that the Joshua Tree National Park Association would like to thank you for being part of the support that resulted in a sidewalk being built at the Joshua Tree Visitor Center all the way up to the highway. Yay! Thank you for your support of that, Supervisor Ramos.
Well, thank you, and hopefully everyone's using that sidewalk that's there. And really that sidewalk resulted in bringing out different supervisors out into the area, because it goes back to what you were saying. If you don't really know the area or visit it, how are you going to stand up and fight for it, or even acknowledge these things when budget constraints come our way and we're asking for things for the Morongo Basin? The DRECP is something that we've been working on, and certainly when we first got elected supervisor, we heard the many challenges that were happening here with the solar industry and trying to develop a balance between the solar industry and to really preserve the pristine desert and keeping it intact to what it is. And so we moved forward on a different ordinance that we created, and I'll talk a little bit more on that. But the DRECP, the final deadline to submit comments, and the county is submitting their comments. We had on February 10th, we had an open discussion for that, where we had the conference center, video conferencing centers open, and we took a lot of those comments that were done during that day and redrafted some of our comments in there. So I'm happy to announce that because of the bringing up the awareness of the 20,000 megahertz and the measurement there, that the county put that into the comments that we're submitting on behalf of the county. We also put in their general distribution as far as that, those areas go. And in the last paragraph that the county is submitting those comments, we put in there that the county is not really happy with what's going on, and we actually are requesting a revised draft to be coming back to circulate. We asked that it come back in 6 months and then give us time to answer and submit questions again on it. Whether it's going to happen or not, the DRECP is where the county is submitting those comments and really taking a lot of comments from the public. So you still have until Monday, the 23rd, to submit those comments. And the county is listening to the community, and through the stakeholder meetings, through BEAT, and through some of the other things that we've actually brought back to the county. And you can see those in the response and the comments that the county is actually referring back to from comments from the county itself. They actually have came from meetings just like this, where the county is standing up for those things and moving those things forward and protecting the area that's here. Other supervisors actually got engaged. Supervisor Hagman wanted to talk about how, if San Bernardino County is going to be an area where we're going to generate solar energy from, then that solar energy should reside here in San Bernardino County, making sure that it's there. And Supervisor Lovingood is, me and Supervisor Lovingood work hand in hand on protecting the desert as much as we can on some of these areas that are here. On BLM land, federal land, the nucleus that the county has is because they have to come to the county for us to approve a water permit for them to move forward in the whole CEQA organization and the things they have to meet there. So that's the nucleus that we have with the federal projects that are on federal land. And there's a couple of them coming up to the Board of Supervisors where we look at those things, and that's how that comes that way. The Planning Commission deals with the projects that are actually in the unincorporated areas of San Bernardino County, and that's the area that we've actually came together and created those 32 conditions, where prior to being elected, there was no conditions at all. There was nothing that was there. So myself and, again, Supervisor Lovingood put a moratorium on the solar industry within, I think, 35 days of being elected. And that served to be, it was great. Yeah, we're going to put a moratorium on there. But before that day was over, our phone was burning up with businesses from solar and even labor groups that were just burning up our phone saying, what are you doing? And we said, well, wait a minute. We have to create a fair and equitable playing field for everyone. Business just can't come in and start to see an open area in the desert and think there's nothing there. There has to be some requirements. There has to be residential. There has to be view sheds. There has to be all these different things that were there. So we did put that moratorium together, and we started working on those conditions. And then we had to go back to the Board of Supervisors to ask for an extension, because the original moratorium only lasted 3 months, and we needed at least 6 months to put something together. So we had to go back and ask for an extension of that, and that became even more challenging because the other supervisors were getting phone calls just like we were. So myself and Supervisor Lovingood got the support of our board, and they granted that extension, and that's how we resulted in 32 conditions that we have now with the Planning Commission to look at those projects coming forward. And there's been projects that have been denied, and then there's projects that are appealed to the board. One in particular, to see where the board was going to stand strong on this ordinance that came through, was in the sphere of influence of Apple Valley, where it wasn't in the sphere of influence in that area where a solar development could take place. And inside that ordinance, we put in there that in the effect that the county's ordinance is less stronger than what the sphere of influence is, like the town of Apple Valley and their sphere of influence, then the stronger ordinance would actually prevail. And so they challenged that it was in the unincorporated areas, but yet it was in the sphere of influence of Apple Valley, the town of Apple Valley. And so we stood strong on that, myself and Supervisor Lovingood, and we were able to hold that up, that ordinance, and deny that project based on the sphere of influence that was there. And that came close because it became a 3-2 vote, but we ended up getting the majority of the board to support us and to stand behind the ordinance. And that was a big milestone in moving forward on those ordinances to see where the board was going to be at. And so those are areas that we continue to work forward in. Being able to now look at those ordinances that are there, is it time to start to gather questions on those things? And one other thing before we move on from the DRECP, the comments that we're talking about, the comments that the county has put it into their letter back to the DRECP, wouldn't have happened if myself and the County Board of Supervisors would not have requested that stakeholder meetings would take place in the communities affected. Because when we first got elected, we asked, well, where are those meetings at? Where did you have meetings at? And they said they had stakeholder meetings. And we said, well, where did you have them at? And they said, in the city of Ontario, right? And so we immediately started advocating for meetings to take place in the communities that were affected by the DRECP, which resulted in meetings at Lucerne Valley and Yaco Valley. And it's those comments that now we're engaged in the letter that San Bernardino County has put forward. Now, talking about and then we moved forward with the ordinance, and we're still following that ordinance. Any solar project that comes up, The balance is there, the playing field is there for business and protecting the environment, but sometimes some industries believe that they could just bypass all that and go straight to an appeal to the Board of Supervisors, which we were able to still hold on to the majority vote there. And now with the reorganization of the board, with the chairman coming from the 3rd District and the vice chairman coming from the 1st District, you see that we're going to be able to stand stronger now to make sure that the desert and the pristine that's there would not be totally overran by the solar industry, making sure that we continue to protect what it is that we cherish here in this area, and we cherish our deserts. And so we're going to be moving forward on Spark. Spark is what the county is actually doing to create a renewable energy plan. And the difference between Spark and the DRECP, the DRECP is asking for comments, but Spark and the county renewable energy plan is actually a plan that we're commenting and we're building. So the comments that you're saying that would come out of this are comments that could actually be built and ingrained in the thread of the ordinance itself. And the first meeting is going to be March 5th from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. and we'll have the video conferences open so that the comments can come forward. And I want to really, again, go back and look at the comments that the county submitted to the DRECP, because there's a lot of good comments in there. And those comments is what we could actually build on to create the renewable energy plan and the document that the county needs to make sure that we are moving forward and providing that growth in those areas. Rooftop is an area that we continue to push forward on. We think that if we could push for the rooftop solar to be generated in the industrial parts of the valley, on top of those industrial warehouses, we're going to be able to save the desert and save the pristine of the desert, because if you have all those industrial buildings there, there's no reason why we couldn't put the rooftop solar there and start to meet some of that demand. We are very concerned about the measurement of the 20,000 megahertz, or whatever it is. I'm not an expert either, but we're pushing, right? Because we think that we're actually almost already there. So why should the desert be pushed even more to create more of different projects that are there when we're already tapped out? The water usage that was brought up is another thing that was brought up at the Johnson Valley, Lucerne Valley MAC last night, where I was at speaking. And if we are going to start looking at the water use that's going through these projects, how is it affecting the quality of life of the people here that's already existing, or the future of the people that are here, grandchildren and those that will continue to reside here? We have to look at that, not just of today of grounding that water, but how is it going to affect it down in the future? The renewable element that we're talking about with Spark is going to start to take place, and we're going to start to build that renewable energy plan. And we're going to need the input. It's vital that we get the input from the community. And unlike how DRECP started out, we're going to be hearing from the community itself, right? So we want to see how it's going to affect those things. And so the session, the first one is March 5th, and it will be the 3rd round of public exchange on the county's general plan renewable energy element process. And additional public workshops will take place. But I want to make sure that you understand that the voice of the desert is being heard. Certainly with this Board of Supervisors, it's there. We've done so much more to protect the desert than's been done in years past. We created the ordinance. We're creating strong comments back to DRECP. And we're looking at the renewable energy plan and making sure those comments are adopted into it. Because no longer can people just drive through the desert and see an open space and say, well, that's free. Nope, nothing's there. But yet there's animals, there's lives, there's cultural resources. There's a quality of life that's there that unless you stop to absorb it, you're not going to understand how to protect it. So these are the things that we're engaged in. We brought every supervisor out here. Now with the addition of Supervisor Hagman, we got to get him out here. But Supervisor Rutherford and Supervisor Gonzalez have also been out into this area. So they understand what it is that we're doing and what it is we're trying to protect. And there's no reason, and I keep saying this, there's no reason we can't look at rooftop solar. Because when you start to look at the rooftop solar, that's where everybody's consuming the energy, and the lines are right there. So we wouldn't have to disturb anything. right? And that's another thing that the county has heard, that we want to look at disturbed land, not any land that hasn't been disturbed. We want to look at those things. But if we can start talking about rooftop solar, getting those things moving, there would be no need to disturb any more of the desert that's here, keeping the pristine desert intact. So when we drive through there, we see more than just open space. We see the beauty that surrounds San Bernardino County. These are some of the issues that we're working on as San Bernardino County and as your Board of Supervisor. And we're going to continue to be that voice to make sure that people understand. Because when we did first start bringing people out, their comments were, well, there's nothing here. Well, there's a lot here. Because there's some supervisors that don't have much unincorporated area. Their districts are totally incorporated cities. But yet, when you spend a little time, the morning out here, you start to relax a little bit and you start to enjoy the beauty that you people see out here, that I see out here. And we have to make sure that we continue to protect it in one unified voice. So thank you for allowing me to come out and speak. And again, March 5th is going to be when we're going to start to move forward on the renewable energy plan and getting those comments back from the community. So remember that day, and we're going to be opening up the video conferencing center so you don't have to drive 160 miles in a trip just to get your voice heard. And I think that video conferencing center has done remarkable as far as getting the voices out and the comments from the community out into those in San Bernardino County. So thank you for allowing me to come out and speak and to hear the speakers here also. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Ramos. There were some encouraging words there about we're being heard. That's always a good thing to hear. We are collecting your questions on the written cards, and while I'm waiting for those to come, we'll see who wants to respond to the questions as they come in, and it may be all three of you. But while we're waiting...
I'll take the easy one.
Oh, you will? Well, how do you know it's easy? Especially with this group. I would reiterate that many of us have been to the government center, and with the video feed into San Bernardino, it's just wonderful. It's there at the Joshua Tree Government Center, kind of on the easternmost side you come in, and it's really a great way to be part of the process. And obviously, from what Supervisor Ramos said, we're being heard. How many of you, just out of curiosity, have commented at least once on either the the solar PEIS, the DRECP, and or the Spark? Could I see hands of people who have? That's heartening as well. That's more than half. That's about 60-70% of the people in the room. That's great. Many of the organizations, the California Desert Coalition, the Morongo Basin Conservation Association, Save Our Desert, hopefully many of you are on our mailing list. If you're receiving those requests to make comments and you haven't yet, hopefully you'll think that this time is a good time to do so. Okay, we've got the first question. It's about water, so we'll see who wants to take it. How much water is used on rooftops compared to solar farms?
I can give it a shot. I don't know if these microphones are
Yeah,
good?
feeding.
Okay, good. The main difference between the water that's used to clean solar on rooftops and the water that's used for utility scale building is in the grading of the land to construct the project. That's the first biggest difference, is when you put them on rooftops, you don't have to grade the land. You don't have to do dust control throughout the life of the project. And because if you grade a piece of land and you create a lot of dust in that area, you have to wash the panels more often. So rooftop solar uses basically no water. There's an occasional cleaning a few times a year. I've maintained a couple rooftop systems in my time at the Wildlands Conservancy. The one at Whitewater was 15 kilowatts, and we washed the panels off once or twice a year. And it produced at its full capacity just with that little tiny bit of use. Less than washing your car.
David, are you getting ready to speak to that as well?
If it's okay. So I think it's a great question, and I just want to be able to, I guess, give a frame of reference. So when we were working on the Ivanpah Solar project, the original estimate for that project was that it was going to use 400 acre-feet of water per year. That doesn't count for construction. So like Fraser said, with any of these projects, it's important to understand the ecology, which is that these systems are kind of perfect closed systems with, the desert pavement is a living system that actually traps sand from becoming airborne. Once that's disturbed, once that crust is broken, you then have a forever problem, which is that dust is going to forever need to be dealt with, and that it's basically a kind of vicious cycle of water use. And I think we all understand that water is an incredibly precious commodity, and the best use of our water is not to produce energy. It's probably just to drink and bathe in and boil bottles for our babies, our brand new. But for Ivanpah, while we really got our butts kicked on almost every single part of that project. But one thing that we were able to do on that project was to get them to go from wet cool to dry cool. And so they changed the water usage from 400 acre-feet a year to 100, which is still frankly way too much. But I wanted to give folks kind of an example, a tangible example of what an industrial scale project might use.
Okay, we have some kind of larger scale questions and some more local, and I'm going to go with a couple of the broader scale questions here. Well, this is at the county level. Supervisor Ramos, a question for you, please. Thanks for advocating and passing the solar ordinance. Is additional money being provided to land use services to implement the ordinance?
One of the things that we're looking at with land use services, not so much in particular to solar, but to the whole department itself, is trying to make sure that those that are actually paying for a service are getting that customer service in return. And that's something that the Board of Supervisors as a whole has pointed out as a priority. The land use and the solar, we did hire someone with the expertise of the desert with some of those areas in there. So it's an area that now land use services understands is important to us. As far as the additional resources, the Board of Supervisors sees that area as an area that we need to get some analytical data from, because we want to actually increase the turnaround time in some of those areas. And we're not sure that it's by just adding more bodies or adding more software or adding more of anything is going to solve the problem, or if we're going to actually start to look at how things are being conducted at this time. And so we're going to be having a study actually on land use services itself. So hopefully that helps out.
Okay, thank you. I think this one is also, well, let me just say, is it possible to change permitting to require solar on rooftops or parking structures, particularly the commercial?
That's one of the things that we're fighting for with the ordinance in itself. We believe that during the permitting process, those that want to build a warehouse building or some type of development, that they would be able to build it to a code that would withstand and hold the solar panels themselves. Because prior to, I believe, and going off memory, to 2007, the roof loads would have to be retrofitted to carry those loads. So that's one of the things that we're pushing. Now that's as individual supervisors, so we have to be able to convince a majority of others to put that in there, which I believe that the plan is minimal. And one of the areas and one of the arguments that we actually put up for it is because of what Prologis is actually doing in the city of Redlands. They actually have on their rooftop solar panels, a large amount. I think it's is it like an acre or a mile of panels on that rooftop. And what they're doing and what makes it feasible for them, they own the building, right? And so the people that lease out inside and conduct business within the building itself is not even tied to the rooftop solar. So what Prologis does is rent out the space inside the building to businesses that are there, but also leases out the rooftop to Edison. So they lease out the rooftop to Edison, gain some more revenue on it. Edison gets it, right, puts those panels on there, and then pushes the solar into the Mount View solar plant that's right there. So you see and that's why I'm saying that if we could create more of that, I mean, that's a model for us to do. But they did have to retrofit some of that roof. So it is an argument that we're making within the whole renewable energy plan and the ordinance to put that forward and to start to advocate for that.
That's a lot of good detailed information, and this next question kind of pertains to you as well. The question is, how does San Bernardino County receive financial benefits from small industrial solar projects, like the ones that we've mentioned here, the Cascade, the Lear project, I assume is what is being talked about? Are tax values that compare with, do they compare with other kinds of development? So the county, how does the county benefit from the smaller solar farms that go within communities?
So the county and the whole community, you heard from the federal government to the state that they're putting all these incentives. They're pushing for solar to be, I think now it's up to 50% solar here. But one of the things of why we've been looking at and really harping and advocating that any type of solar, even in the ordinance and DRECP, would go on already disturbed land, because we believe that the pristine land that's there, pristine land that we need to preserve. I think the Desert Protection Act that's been introduced will start to preserve some of those areas. But also communities continue to grow. And if you take that land base away with solar development, how is a community going to continue to grow? Taking away some of that vital land that's there to see the growth happen. Certainly, those that have been here a long time have seen the growth of this community. It used to be, and it's growing, right? So why should we actually look at some of the land that's valuable when it's already disturbed land that we already see? So that's why we keep arguing that point. As far as does it measure up to a development and the property tax value? The property taxes is where the county really gets most of its discretionary money. The $4.9 billion budget that's there is mostly from federal and state funding. That's restricted funding straight for programs that are in there. Of that, the discretionary money that truly goes to San Bernardino County is about $300 to $400 million. And that comes from the property tax value. So if the property value is assessed a little higher, certainly it's going to benefit the county. So the solar projects that go on out there, we still advocate to go on land that's already been disturbed, land that might not be favorable to the expansion of some of the growths in some of the community.
The questions continue to be directed pretty much to you, if you want to take a sip of water in between.
I'm out of water.
We have several here that are referring to the Joshua Tree Airport proposed project. The questions have to do with, in part, the actually being fairly close to the park border and the issues of view shed, and also the like it's less than 2 miles away from the edge of the park. And the other question is, oh gosh, I've got so many here. Does an airport count as disturbed land? Does the county put value to potential loss of community assets, which an airport would be perceived as a community asset? Would that be, counted when you're thinking about the benefits and losses of using this airport and considering it disturbed land? Maybe it isn't, maybe it is.
Well, I think all of it goes into the decision-making process. And again, the process is unincorporated areas of permits going through. You have to get the agreement with Edison first, and then move forward through the Planning Commission. And so those questions, I believe, will come up. As far as the airport and some of those things, we get so anxious to start to talk and comment on some of these things, but when they come back to the Board of Supervisors in a hearing or in an appeal, and if we make statements out in the public of one way or another, it might push us out of that dialogue altogether. But I will let you know that I was here a couple weeks back, and I did visit the airport, so I'm familiar with the area. So even though you might not see me and all these things, I am out here. I'm looking at where these projects grow. And I was actually there and over in Landers looking at those areas there. So I do gather the information, and when it is appealed to the Board of Supervisors, it's a quasi-hearing. So you can't come out and state one position or another. We just gather the facts, and on that day, we start to advocate for a position, so.
That's clear. I wondered if maybe the other two presenters want to talk at all about the disturbed lands issue. Certainly a big issue.
Sure. I think the first most important thing that I would mention about disturbed lands is there's been a number of different inventories desert-wide on disturbed lands, from fallowed ag land to old mines to brownfields. One of the inventories is the Environmental Protection Agency's study from several years back, and it talks specifically about how to guide renewable energy towards disturbed lands. Another thing I would say about disturbed lands is some of the environmental groups have gone out and toured disturbed land sites across the California desert. Most of the disturbed lands in the California desert are private lands, so the county would have permitting control. So we're very encouraged that the county is talking about use of disturbed lands and pushing that in the DRECP. There is a DRECP alternative one that is the disturbed lands alternative. It may not be as good as a rooftop alternative, but it's a pretty good alternative. So I would just offer that. There's less species conflict, and there certainly is less conflict with trying to build new transmission lines into disturbed lands. Most of the disturbed lands already have transmission. So in our basin, we might not have a great resource for disturbed lands, but desert-wide we do.
And David?
Well, so I guess the first question that comes to my mind is who's defining the disturbed lands? Because I have in different experiences had people tell me that places that are of tremendous value are disturbed lands. So when I think about disturbed lands, I try to use one base definition, which is land that has been mechanically altered. So in my mind, if grazing has occurred on a landscape, it's not necessarily a disturbed land. It might be an impacted land, or the resources may have been impacted, but it's not disturbed and necessarily appropriate for renewable energy development. But what this all makes me think about, I guess that when I think about it at a little bit of a higher level, it's that there's a fundamental, maybe misunderstanding is not the right word, maybe a lack of communication. Because I think that I almost see it like all this energy is getting put into trying to create plans, but what we really have is we have places throughout the California desert that have incredibly different perspectives and positions on renewable energy. There are many communities that really, really want it. There's other communities that really don't want it, or that they really want it, but they only want it in specific places. And I think what needs to occur is a conversation where communities are able to come together and really discuss what it is, what their vision for their community is, and how solar fits into that or doesn't fit into that picture. And I think that could actually be a really helpful conversation, because there are communities across the California desert who really, really want economic benefits associated with renewable energy. There's also a lot of communities who really don't feel like it's appropriate and that it harms their quality of life. And I'd really like to see that conversation occur.
I have another question. I'm trying to paraphrase and combine some of these, so forgive me if I'm stumbling a little bit. But here is a specific question towards the DRECP and the county plan. When calculating acreage requirements over the next 25 years, so I guess that technically speaks to the DRECP, do the figures take into account future improvements in efficiency?
I can take a crack at that. The way that they have commented on efficiency improvements in the acreage calculations is just to say that they can't account for what's going to happen with efficiency improvements in the future. That's almost verbatim from the acreage calculator in the DRECP. It is operating on the assumption of current technology and not with a lot of efficiency improvements in technology. I also would like to share that the state has a plan called the California Energy Efficiency Strategic Plan, or CESP, that was published some years ago that talks about statewide energy goals and a loading order, that the first thing that we have to get right as a state is to create efficiencies in the way that we're building commercial buildings and houses that we're retrofitting existing buildings to find all the efficiency improvements that we possibly can. And then we're, the last place that we look to load energy in is places that would harm the environment in any way. So California already has said their strategic plan, their priority is to look for efficiency first and look for things that disturb the environments for energy sources last under that strategic plan.
Okay, we're getting close to the end here, but this, I think, comes as a recommendation, Supervisor Ramos. It is a statement, not a question, but I think there's some good points in it. As a solar installer, it would seem that true support of rooftop solar by the county would include drafting codes that maximize the allowable size of residential rooftops and moving them to the peaks to maximize production and extend production later into the evenings. So certainly some of those placement and size issues hopefully will be a part of the discussion. And that could also go into the Spark comments. And by the way, there's little small-sized cards over there that have the Spark website on them at the MBCA table, which I urge you to pick up and do some commenting on Spark.
I think, just to comment on that too, on March 5th, that's exactly what that meeting is for, is to hear from you the ideas or even statements like this, so they could get on record with the full Board of Supervisors on some of those things in the whole renewable energy plan. So March 5th from 2 to 4 p.m., again, the video conferencing center will be open, and getting those written comments in, making sure your voice is being heard so that we could actually hear some of those things, so then we could go back and advocate for it. It's one thing for an individual supervisor to advocate for something, but it's also something when you start to advocate for, in this case, rooftop solar, and you hear the community advocate for it too, you start to get that momentum, and it makes it a little bit easier to start to advocate for those things with everybody around the table. So.
On this one, I'm going to perhaps soften it, but rather than ask the question, that's me. But there is an audience member who wonders about supervisors having contributions from oil or fossil fuel companies, and this would be, of course, a personal thing, in your own, and there's legal things about here, but wonders whether it might not be a really strong statement of support for renewable energy by divesting, if you indeed do get contributions from, fossil fuel companies. It would be a strong statement of conviction towards the renewable energy. So again, I thought that's sort of a comment instead of asking you the question, but you're welcome to answer it.
I think, we alluded to it when we put the moratorium together. I mean, if we believe that something's right, we're going to stand up and do it. We put the 32 conditions together, and even in light of some of the solar industry and even some of the union groups coming up and raising concern. But we also understand that if it fits the components of those conditions, that we're also engaged in creating jobs that are out in the area. So it has to fit those things. And it's not that if you accept some of those contributions, this and that now you're going to just somehow not stand up strong. We have our convictions. Certainly myself, we understand that we have to be able to protect the desert and those that are there. I think there's projects that are coming up where we're going to be standing strong on what it is we believe in, and at the end of the day, that's what we stand on. So,
thank you. I'm going to get these last two in, and then we will be done. There was, perhaps David, this would be for you. Is there what are the parameters of concern about view sheds around national parks vis-a-vis solar projects, small or large? How, as the National Parks Conservation Association representative, what are your concerns?
They are as many as the day is long. I'll say that. So first I'll say that I really appreciate that the county ordinance spoke to national park view sheds, and I think that was a tremendous uplift, because it gave us the ability to state that not only do we believe this and the nonprofit and environmental world believes it, but that the county, who's a tremendously powerful stakeholder, believes this as well. But when I also think about, just in terms of running campaigns, because we run a lot of campaigns, The view shed issue has not been one that we've traditionally been very successful on. And it's because there's not a lot of teeth. I think that's changing. The BLM is now looking at some, what they're calling visual, VRI, visual resource inventory. So they have more quantifiable data about how view sheds are changing. But from my perspective, it's almost criminal that these view sheds can be impacted, because when you think about what it takes to create a national park, and you think about the efforts that people go to protect some of the most special places in the world, the inspiration that they feel and what causes that inspiration, to basically cut that away, or for example, just say Soda Mountains. I think about all the kids that go to that place to go to Zizek's to go see bighorn sheep, because they love bighorn sheep. And for them to get out of the urban sector and to get to the boundary of a national park, and the first thing they see is an industrialized zone, is the exact opposite of what they should be doing. Same thing with desert sunlight. Somebody has traveled from across the country, right? They're just about to get to the national park, and what do they see? They have to go through a giant industrialized zone. If I want to go to Clark Mountain, I have to go through the Ivanpah Solar Project. I literally have to drive through it to access the national park. That's what we're signing up for, and I couldn't be more opposed to it, frankly.
Thank you. And as the last question, I'm going to, again, somewhat rephrase. Supervisor Ramos, if there's a person who is concerned about a neighborhood solar project that's going in that they didn't know about in advance, and I know there have been issues on several about the notification to people, what is the process? Who's responsible for, at what level does a solar project that's going to come in nearby a residential community need to alert neighbors? Do you know about those parameters?
I'm not sure if that's a specific project.
It is. It says the Bowman project, but I'm not familiar with that. Is that the Landers one, the S? Well, I didn't want to put him on the spot for a particular project, because I'm not sure that you know about it.
But the process for the project is the applicant would go in and get the application to move forward on that, get the agreement with California Edison, Southern California Edison, and then would actually go before the Planning Commission where those questions would be brought up, which we have those 32 conditions that are there to give some guidance, again, guidance to the planning commissioners themselves. The Planning Commission will be able to vote on those issues based on some of those conditions on the projects that come up. In the event that sometimes maybe some things do get approved and there's still an appeal process to it, it'll come to the full Board of Supervisors on that. And I believe we have, because I know we put in there in the 32 conditions about closeness to residents in those areas. So,
I'd just like to add that was something that was very weak, that the ordinance strengthened. There was a larger radius around where a project was. I don't know off the top of my head what that radius or distance from a project was, that the company was required to notice the residents inside that certain radius away from the project about the project. I think it was 1,000 feet. I'm going to throw that out there. That's another thing that could be strengthened, though. I think that's a widely held belief that 1,000 feet probably just isn't enough.
Thank you for adding that. That's very helpful. And they're glad to hear it. And actually, that does, I ran over a little bit because we got a late start, but certainly a warm round of applause for our wonderful panel. Very useful.
And for our facilitator.
Do remember that the next one of these is on Friday, March 20th. The topic will be engaging a new generation of park stewards, and there will be 3 educators who are going to talk about their educational efforts, mostly with young people, to help them appreciate and become involved in desert stewardship. Romina Arce of the Living Desert, Caroline Conway of Wildlands Conservancy, and Cindy Zaks of Yucca Valley High School will be the panelists. Please stop at the tables before you leave. See you next month. Thank you.